Whispers through the pines. In a quiet mountain town nestled deep within the forests of Oregon, life moved slowly. The scent of pine lingered in the crisp air, and the sound of the wind brushing through the tall trees felt like a lullaby to the soul. It was in this peaceful corner of the world that Elena Winters, a young woman with a gentle spirit and a passion for painting, chose to settle after the loss of her mother. Elena had left behind the city life, exchanging concrete streets for dirt paths and crowded cafes for the comforting silence of nature. She moved into a small cabin that once belonged to her grandparents. There, surrounded by towering trees and the whispers of the past, she began to find herself again. One rainy afternoon, as Elena was painting by the window, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a man soaked from head to toe, his dark hair dripping, and a slightly embarrassed smile on his face. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "My car broke down a few miles back, and my phone's dead. I saw the smoke from your chimney and thought maybe you could help." His name was Noah Blackwood, a travel photographer with a heart that had wandered as much as his feet. He had come to the mountains to escape, to find something real amid the chaos of the world. Elena offered him a towel, some tea, and a seat by the fire. Their conversation was shy at first, but comfortable, like two people who knew loneliness well but were not afraid of silence. Noah ended up staying for several days while his car was repaired in the nearby town. During that time, he and Elena discovered an unexpected connection. She took him on long walks through hidden trails, shared stories behind her paintings, and showed him the secret lake that mirrored the sky. In return, he showed her the photographs from his travels: cities at dusk, deserts blooming after rain, children dancing in dusty streets. "I used to think love was something loud and consuming," Elena said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this feels quiet and steady. Like the way the sun rises, not because it has to, but because it always does." Noah looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Maybe love doesn't need to shout to be heard. The days turned into weeks, and by the time Noah's car was fixed, neither of them wanted to leave what they had found. But reality crept in. Noah had commitments, galleries waiting, and a world still calling to him. Elena, too, had her roots in the mountains, her art, and the peace she had only just begun to rebuild. "I don't want to ask you to stay," Elena said as they stood beneath the pines. "But I also don't want to ask you to leave." Noah took her hand. "Then let's not ask. Let's choose." He returned a month later, not as a visitor, but as someone who had chosen love. He brought his camera and turned their mountain into a gallery. Elena painted while Noah photographed, their art woven with memories, laughter, and a quiet devotion that grew deeper with each season. Years passed. Their love didn't fade, it matured like the forest around them. They grew older, but never apart. Sometimes, people would come across their cabin and speak of the couple who lived in the woods, the painter and the photographer, and say that you could feel love in the way the wind moved through the trees. Because some love stories are not about fireworks or grand declarations. Some are simply about finding someone who listens to the quiet with you, and stays. Where the wildflowers grow. On the edge of a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and whispering woods, there was a small cottage with blue shutters and a garden overflowing with wildflowers. It belonged to Alara, a gentle-hearted young woman who found beauty in simple things, sunlight through trees, the hum of bees, and the wind that carried stories across the fields. Alara lived alone, ever since her grandmother passed away 2 years prior. Her days were filled with tending the garden, painting in her attic studio, and sending letters to her childhood friend, Aiden. He had joined the army and had been stationed overseas for 3 years. They wrote often, sometimes about deep thoughts, sometimes only about the weather or memories of their youth. But every letter was a thread keeping them close. Aiden and Alara had grown up as neighbors, inseparable since the age of 5. They would race through the meadows, build forts from blankets and branches, and dream beneath the stars. Though neither ever said it aloud, love had bloomed slowly between them like the wildflowers she so adored, soft, natural, and undeniable. One day, in late spring, Alara received a letter unlike the others. The handwriting was familiar, but the tone was different. Aiden wrote that he was being discharged and would finally be coming home. At the bottom of the page were just 4 words, "Wait for me there." And so she did. Every evening, Alara would sit by the garden gate, eyes on the horizon, waiting for the figure she'd imagined 1,000 times. The days passed, then a week. Then 2. Doubt began to creep in like shadows before dusk. But Alara held on to hope. Love, she believed, was always worth waiting for. On the 17th evening, just as the sky turned gold, a figure appeared at the edge of the path. Dusty boots, a worn satchel, and a tired smile she'd know anywhere. "Aiden," she whispered, breath caught in her throat. "Alara," he said, and in a few steps, he was there, arms wrapped around her like he'd never left. She smelled the scent of the earth and wind on him, and felt his heartbeat against hers. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come," she admitted. "I would have crossed the world to get back to you," he said, eyes shining. "Because no matter where I went, you were always home." That night, they sat beneath the old sycamore tree where they had carved their initials as children. Aiden took her hand and pulled something from his pocket, a tiny box with a ring made from twisted silver and a wildflower pressed into the design. "I've carried this with me for years," he said, voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know when or how, but I knew, if I came back, I wanted to ask you one thing. Alara, will you marry me?" Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she smiled through them. "Yes," she breathed. 1,000 times, yes. They were married under a canopy of trees, with wildflowers in her hair and sunlight in their hearts. The village gathered to celebrate not just a wedding, but a love that had withstood time, distance, and uncertainty. And in that cottage with blue shutters, where the wildflowers grew thick and free, Alara and Aiden began a new chapter, one filled with laughter, quiet evenings, shared dreams, and the kind of love that blooms once in a lifetime. Echoes of the forgotten melody. In a quiet coastal town named Elmsworth, where the sea kissed the shore with a timeless rhythm, lived a woman named Evelyn Hayes. She was a music teacher in her 30s, known for her soft voice, her gentle eyes, and the way she made even the most stubborn piano student believe in beauty. Yet behind her composed demeanor lay a heart quietly waiting for something she couldn't name. Years ago, Evelyn had loved a man named Adrian Clark. He was a composer, a dreamer, with fingers that danced over piano keys and a laugh that could warm any winter. They met at a music conservatory in Vienna, where he played while she sang. Their love blossomed in attics filled with old sheet music and cafes lit by flickering candles. But Adrian was offered a fellowship in Italy, and Evelyn, bound by her father's illness and her mother's grief, couldn't follow. They promised to write. They promised to wait. But as time passed, the letters slowed, then stopped. Evelyn never heard from him again. Years later, Evelyn returned to Elmsworth, and Adrian faded into a quiet ache, until one stormy afternoon when she received a letter in a familiar, slanted hand. Dear Evelyn, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you still remember me. I've returned to Elmsworth. If you're willing to meet, come to the old church on Sunday at dusk. I'll be waiting, under the pipe organ where we first played together. Adrian. Her hands trembled as she read it. Her heart, which had grown cautious and quiet, beat like a drum. She went. The church was silent, filled only with the scent of old wood and rain. Candles flickered on the altar. And there he was, Adrian. His hair was streaked with silver now, his face older, but the eyes were the same, thoughtful, searching, kind. I never stopped writing, he said, voice husky. I sent letters every month. I thought you didn't want to hear from me. Evelyn's breath caught. I never received any. I thought you'd forgotten. They stood in silence, lost in the years between them. Then Adrian stepped forward, held out his hand, and said, let's play something. They sat at the old piano. He began with a melody she didn't recognize, soft, wistful, aching. It rose and fell like the tide, the notes carrying echoes of their lost years. Then she understood, it was for her. A song of waiting, of sorrow, of hope. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. And then she added her voice, soft at first, then steady, like she had never stopped singing beside him. When the last note faded, Adrian turned to her. Stay, he whispered. And she did. That night, Elmsworth glowed with a new warmth, as two hearts that had wandered through silence and time found their way back to one another. Through music, memory, and love that had never truly ended.